This is Con Carne, a Q101 podcast presented by Alex Ross Art. Legendary comics creator Alex Ross. He's on YouTube at the Alex Ross. He also has a website, which is fantastic, alexrossart.com. And when you visit the website of Alex Ross, you'll be blown away by all the covers and illustrations and paintings that are there. But you can also buy original art, which would look stunning anywhere on earth. Now, if you're listening, you don't get to see this, but if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, here's a little bit more about what Alex Ross is all about.
It's Con Carne. Let's eat in the car. It's Con Carne. And now here's the star of our show, James Van Alstyne.
So if you're watching this, you can see in the background, my window's open. It's gorgeous outside. The sun is out. The weather has taken a turn. Spring is here. And with that in mind, on Sunday, May 19th, we're heading to Soldier Field. It's the Fight for Air Climb, something I'm doing with the American Lung Association to raise funds and raise awareness to help fight lung disease. You can be part of my team as we take on the stairs at Soldier Field. Go to fightforairclimb.org/Chicago. And once you're there, click register as a team member and search for Con Carne. And there you go. You're on the team. Or if you don't want to be part of my team, maybe you want to start your own team. Cool. You could do that. Same process. fightforairclimb.org/Chicago. Let's do some good. Let's have some fun. I will see you at Soldier Field. Safety and security are things that you and I want, need, and expect. What if you could always come home to a well-lighted house, knowing that everyone inside was perfectly safe? Or that package you've been waiting on, maybe it's a box of records or computer stuff. What if you knew that it was delivered and secured? Now's the time. Embrace the future of smart living. Call my guy, Dan. Call his personal phone number, 630-730-3728, and he'll walk you through how easy it is to turn your home into a smart home. That's what easy automation is all about. Call Dan for a free, no strings attached quote, or if you don't want to talk to his friendly, warm, and welcoming voice, go to his website, easy-automation.net. Stiff Little Fingers doing their final U.S. tour starting next month, and that run will find the band at Metro once again on Friday, May 10th. Stiff Little Fingers, legendary Irish band. They were there at the front end of punk rock in 1977, and they burned bright for 6 years before breaking up. As we know, no band stays broken up forever. They got back together in 1987 and have been going through today. But here we are at the finish line for Stiff Little Fingers, and I have frontman Jake Burns on with me virtually. In a cruel twist, we never once spoke when he lived here in Chicago. Now that he's on the other side of the country, here we are talking virtually over Zoom. So, Jake, I mentioned in my intro that you lived in Chicago, but all those years in Chicago, we never actually spoke. I had to wait till you were across the country to speak to you. Were you just done with Chicago?
Not so much Chicago. I thoroughly loved living there, and I, still got a lot of good friends there. Obviously, it was more. I was kind of done with big cities, to be honest. James was kind of the real reason. I've lived in cities my whole life. I was born and grew up in Belfast. I lived in London, lived in Newcastle, then lived in Chicago. So I guess, and it probably all goes back to when probably your father, the same as mine, when they reached the magic age of 65, they were allowed to retire. And that's not so much the case these days, but I guess 65 was kind of a milestone to me. So when I saw that looming on the horizon, I said to my wife, I've always wanted to live in a small town, and I'm going to be 65 soon. And if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. How do you feel about it? And she jumped at the idea. So that was kind of the main reason. It was more an easing back on the gas, really. It was just, just slow things down a bit. And also, I think, I'd kind of done everything that I wanted to do in major cities, really.
That makes sense. And since you're talking about age, let's talk about the fact that this tour is the final U.S. tour, the final coast to coast Stiff Little
Yeah,
Fingers tour. What is
yeah.
this? Are we at the finish line?
I think we're close to it. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, again, when I made the decision I wanted to move to a small town, that was actually part of it. And I did say to Shirley, like, I think let's just stop, go, go buy a little house in the country, sit on the porch, drink wine and watch deer walk by. And she just started laughing at me and went, "No, you couldn't stop. You'll miss it too much." And there's an element of truth to that as well. So that was kind of when I hit on the idea of sort of semi-retirement, if you like. And I ran it by the rest of the band. And I was expecting some sort of kickback, and I was amazed that the three remaining members, two of them went, "Oh, thank God you said it." And to be honest, it's more the traveling than anything else, James. It's not
Yeah.
the playing. The playing's still the fun bit. But it's just getting more and more of a nuisance to drag your bones around the place. So, we'd already decided then that we weren't going to go back to Australia or Japan because it's just too damn far. As much fun as we had in both those locations, Australia particularly had been very, very good to us in recent years, and that had become a regular, like once every 2 year trip. I actually had the US until COVID came around, and that was another thing that kind of knocked everything, off its axis somewhat. And I think sort of sitting around the apartment for a year and a half, 2 years, was another reason I wanted to get out of a big city. Was the realization that we could sell our little 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Square and buy a nice 4-bedroom house out in the countryside was a major factor in it as well. But no, I mean, yeah, I think that with regards to the finish line for the band, I think that we're still going to play some sort of UK tour every year, simply because we've played in Glasgow every St. Patrick's Day for the last 30 odd years, I think. And we've got a regular hometown show in Belfast in Northern Ireland every August that we've done now for the last 6 years. And those are kind of things that we can build some sort of calendar around. And obviously, if we get invited to play festivals, which we do, and we can make those work, then we'll do that. But yeah, and also we do have pretty much enough material for. It sounds ridiculous to call it a farewell album, but to kind of. I think the songs that we've got are good enough that I don't want them just to disappear. So I'd kind of like to bookend the career by putting an album at the end of it as well.
And I'm glad that you think in terms of albums, because we live in a very a la carte musical culture where people pepper singles here or there. I mean, you think in terms of A-sides and B-sides, don't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I still do, but that's because I'm old. But yes, you're right. I mean, people do cherry pick the bits that they want. I mean, that's very much something, even to be talking in terms of an album is kind of, March as a dinosaur, really. And I mean, a lot of people have actually asked, why didn't we just release and record and release the songs as we were going? Because, some folk have done that and just streamed stuff. And with the exception of maybe one song, I wrote one song called 16 Shots, which was based on the killing of Laquan McDonald in Chicago. And that probably is the only song that I kind of feel we probably should have recorded and put out at the time, just simply because it was, relevant to that particular point in time. Until, of course, you stop and think about it and think, well, actually, no, that's a problem. That was just one tragic symptom of an ongoing problem. So you can still make a case for the song. But honestly, if we'd all lived in the same city, maybe we would have done that. But the fact that, at the time I was in Chicago, Our guitar player had just moved from Los Angeles to Atlanta. Our bass player was in Norwich in England, and the drummer was in Oxford. So it wasn't really practical for us just to record, the songs and release them as we were going. As a consequence of which, we're stuck with the dinosaur concept of recording an album.
Well, I'm excited to see Stiff Little Fingers at Metro, which we haven't been able to do for a few years in Chicago. Last time you played Metro was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the last time I saw you was during the pandemic. It was you solo at the drive-in.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Which was the weirdest way to see a show, and I'm glad we've all collectively moved past that. But one thing that fascinates me about you, Jake Burns of Stiff Little Fingers, you're a natural storyteller. You're a raconteur. You've got this wonderful way of sharing your life and experiences on stage. I guess my question is, how do you remember all the things you talk about to such great detail? How is that not all lost in the fogginess of time and years? Because you're really good with the specifics and details.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how exactly on the money my memory is, though. Certain things obviously stand out. I mean, basically hanging up the phone on Pete Townsend stands out pretty obviously as that's not the sort of thing you do every day. But yeah, a lot of the stuff. I mean, I'm sure if there was somebody else in the room, they could tell you that that wasn't exactly how things happened. In fact, actually, funnily enough, since I just mentioned the Townsend story, I used to finish that tale by saying, he was phoning up to offer us a tour of America with the Who, and we didn't get it. And a lot of the point being, I put it down to the fact that when he said he was Pete Townsend, I said, yeah, I was the fucking Pope, and put the phone down on him. And it turns out I was talking to the guy who was our manager at the time, Gordon Ogilvie. I think it was like last year he came to the London show, and I was talking to him, and that story came up, and he just looked at me blankly and said, "But we did get offered the tour." I went, "We did?" And he said, "Oh, right. No, we didn't tell you guys because the record company just thought you weren't ready for it. They thought it probably would have killed you at that stage of your lives. Still, green behind the ears to your first taste of America was touring with the Who." They were probably right. I mean, it probably would have been quite a lot to take on for a bunch of kids, but it would have been nice to have been at least given the option for us to say no.
Was the Who still cool to a young punk band in the late 70s, or were they the geezers?
Yeah, no, they were one of the bands that still were. I think because they were still dangerous. I mean, even without Moon, Townsend is a very interesting character. He's a very prickly character, and I think that the intelligence of a lot of their work stood up, and they were never really. I mean, apart from you could probably make a case for the pomposity of writing rock operas, which but at least they weren't Rick Wakeman rock operas on ice and stuff like that. I mean, they still had that air of like I said, danger about them. I think that made them. Still made them relevant. When you think that the likes of the Sex Pistols were covered in Substitute and stuff, so
right.
They still had credibility. I'm not sure how we'd have taken it if we'd been invited on tour with, I don't know, Led Zeppelin or somebody like that.
Or Boston.
Yeah, I mean, were Boston even still playing at that point, or they imploded by 1980? I mean,
Fair. I used to roll my eyes at the idea of a rock opera, and then much later in life, I realized, holy shit, Quadrophenia is really good. Took me a while, but I came around.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I must be the only person I know who actually prefers Tommy, but that's probably because I lived with it for much longer.
So thinking about those early days, 1977, you mentioned the Sex Pistols, that whole era of punk rock, you were at the front line of this. Go ahead. I'm wondering, is the basic ethos of punk rock, of that community back in those days, is it still the same? Are we in a different world, or has punk rock endured?
I think that there have been a number of waves, obviously, just because of how long it's lasted. I don't think anybody expected it to last this long. I know I certainly didn't. In fact, I didn't see any enduring quality to it at all when I first heard it. I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was a great sharp shock that I felt the music industry needed. I mean, the fact that I just mentioned Rick Wakeman's, King Arthur on Ice, and I'm actually not making that up. He did do that. Um, it the fact that that was kind of the barometer of where music was, to suddenly hear the Ramones and the Sex Pistols, write great songs and be done in 2.5, 3 minutes was wonderful. I basically I grew up listening to the Black Sabbaths and the Led Zeppelins and adoring them when I was 14, 15. But by the time punk rock rolled around, I was 19 and I'd grown out of all that stuff. I wasn't interested anymore. And I was, I was listening to songwriters by that stage more than actual, virtuosos on guitar or whatever. So I was basically longing for that sort of a return to roots values. As to whether it's endured or not, I don't really know. I mean, it depends what you wanted out of it, I suppose. Like I said, I was dragged in by the short, sharp shock of it and convinced of its possibility of longevity by hearing the first Clash album, particularly the song "Career Opportunities." I keep coming back to that, mainly because they were writing about their own lives and about the lives of a lot of people of that age, and how there was very little for them to look forward to in the world of work, and that actually. Then I suddenly said, "Oh, hang on! There's more to this than just getting up people's noses. There's more to this than just antagonizing people." And therefore, I did see a future to it. Now, whether I saw a future for myself in it, obviously, that's turned out to be the case. But I honestly wouldn't have thought that we'd have been talking 46, 47 years later about what was essentially a youth movement. And still to be part of it. Like I said, at 66 years old is kind of ridiculous. But I think there have been a number of waves of bands that have come after that have broadly, flown their flag under the punk rock banner. Some have been, I think some have been inspirational. Some have been worth the ticket, and they tend to be the ones that found their own voice fairly quickly. I think those that slavishly copied other bands, like any genre of music, doesn't, I'm not just talking about punk rock here. They tend to be the ones that, they might have one or two decent songs if you could be bothered to look for them. But really, the majority of those bands I don't really have a lot of time for because they all sound so samey to me. But those that, that did discover their own voice and their own character, then those are the ones that have endured, and those are the ones that I actually listen to.
A quick reminder, Sunday, May 19th, Soldier Field. It is the Fight for Air Climb, something I'm doing with the American Lung Association to fight lung disease. We're raising funds. I'm building a team. Go to fightforairclimb.org/Chicago. Click register as a team, find Con Carne, and let's do this together. The Fight for Air Climb. We're going to take on Soldier Field. It's nice out. Let's do this. That world you described, the career opportunities world that the Clash described, isn't it essentially the world that exists in alternative Ulster?
Yeah, I mean, we were both writing about this at the same time, and I think career opportunities probably did subconsciously influence the writing in alternative Ulster because there was an element of, if these guys living in London are bored, where they can go out any night of the week and go see these incredible bands if they wanted to, and of course at that age I did want to. They want to try come and live in here where we've had civil unrest since 1969, and no bands came to play, or very, very, very few. They either were too afraid to come, or they couldn't get insurance to come, or their managers and record companies didn't think it was worth going. Whatever, there were a bundle of reasons, but basically, apart from Rory Gallagher once a year and the occasional, and I don't mean to be demeaning by this, but it's the only way I can really describe them, sort of second or third division rock bands, they would occasionally come. I think mainly because they were getting extortionate amounts of money because nobody else was coming. Sure. So if they were brave enough to get on the boat and come over, they were also guaranteed a full house because nobody came and played, As a consequence of which, I went to see anybody who came over, and you saw some weird and wonderful acts, really, which I'm kind of glad I saw, but I would never have gone to see the vast majority of them if I'd had the choice, I mean, the choice of seeing somebody else,
Thinking about what you were saying earlier about putting together a farewell album, you've got the songs, you're going to figure out how to make that happen. flashing back to Inflammable Material while we're on the topic of alternative Ulster, I mean, it was
Yeah.
just album after album after album in those early days. I mean, what a prolific creative period. I mean, I realize you weren't the only artist cranking out lots of albums at that time, but
Right.
looking back on it, it seems extraordinary to create that massive body of work in such a short amount of time.
Well, I mean, also, I think that it was, it was kind of expected of you, and I don't know how many bands were actually prepared for it. I mean, it's the old dilemma of the difficult second album, and it's not so much that the second album is difficult; it's that you've had your entire life up until the first album to write that album, and then if you're in a position where you get signed by a record label, they want to get their investment back as soon as possible, and that
Right.
means they need a second album, pretty damn, lickety split. So um, we were in a very uh, fortunate position in so much as we got turned down by every record label to start with, which sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but it meant that um, we were free then when Rough Trade came to us and said, look, because they'd put out Alternative Ulster for us as a standalone single.
Mm-hmm.
And they came to us and said, we noticed you didn't get picked up by anyone. We'd done a tour supporting the Tom Robinson Band, which was a pretty big deal back then. They were a real major act, and they were playing like all the major venues, and the Star Tour was sold out. And we'd gone down really well, so we expected to get signed. We didn't get signed. And Jeff Travis basically said to us, look, we've never made an album. You've never made an album. How about we do it together, and when we've recouped the money, we'll just split the profit 50-50, which was an incredible deal. I mean, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get that from EMI or whoever. Right. And as a consequence of which, when that record came out and was a hit, suddenly every record label that turned us down was on the phone again, and they wanted to sign us. And we were in, like I said, this very fortunate position if we could basically write our own contract. So we did. I mean, we didn't actually sign the band to Chrysalis Records. We leased each album to them for, I think, 10 years, and then we got the albums back. So they were basically allowed to sell it for 10 years, and they had no input on what it sounded like, what the cover looked like, what anything looked like. And realistically, if we had wanted to, we could have said, nah, we don't feel like making an album this year. Thing was, we actually did feel like making an album. There was an outpouring of creativity, I think, because suddenly the world opened up in front of us. Up to that point, we had played very few shows because we were on the island of Ireland, and there's only so many places you can play. I mean, the entire country. I think there are more people live in London than live in the entire country of Ireland. So there are only a certain number of shows you could actually play anyway.
Right.
We'd expanded that to the UK and England, Scotland, Wales, and that broadened the palette a bit. And then we found that we could go into Europe. We didn't actually come to America until we signed to Chrysalis. But suddenly there was this whole world to play with, if you like. And yeah, we were excited. So, and I think excitement played a big part in wanting to make the records. But I think it's the opening track of the Undertones second record, the song "More Songs About Chocolate and Girls," which is obviously, since they won the same label as Talking Heads, is obviously a bit of a nod of the head to Talking Heads. But there's a line in there that says, I think the line is, "Here's more songs about chocolate and girls, a lot less time but a lot more care," which is exactly what the pressures you were under.
Right.
You got you've got all these years to write. And you recorded the first album in a burst of enthusiasm and youthful bravado. That becomes a hit, and then suddenly you're put in an expensive recording studio with a producer who knows what he's doing, and you've only got 6 months to write it. And you've got to take, you can't just sort of stand around and go, the guitar's slightly out of tune. Oh yeah, but it sounds great. Just leave it on there, because there was somebody from the record label going, no, replace it. So you had to take more care of it. So. Although, like I said, we didn't, because we pretty much wrote our own contract. So,
Amazing. So, again, Metro is when we can see you. This show is happening on May 10th, right?
10th,
there are certainly songs people kind of expect to hear and see
right.
from Stiff Little Fingers on this tour. And just thinking about some of them, one in particular, the song "Nobody's Hero," is that about fame and celebrity?
Kind of. I mean, what it was about was actually there's a TV show in the UK called Top of the Pops. I mean, we hadn't actually been on it at that point, but we'd been on the front cover of a bunch of magazines, and we'd been on a bunch of other TV shows, and we knew that Top of the Pops was coming. And already, people who'd been our friends, even close friends, started to treat us differently, and they were treating us differently, I think, because they expected us to behave differently. And we hadn't changed to as far as any of us could see. I mean, obviously, we were a lot busier with the band than we would have been, if we'd all stayed in Ireland, because, as I said, we'd only been playing 15, 20 shows a year. So we were a lot busier, but beyond that, we hadn't changed. Well, I didn't think we'd changed. I mean, of course, their perception of us was we had changed. We'd moved to England. If we were talking to them at all, we were running into other people in bands quite a bit, who by that stage to us were just other people in bands, but to our friends were names on record sleeves that they could never, they never thought they'd ever meet, much less, suddenly their pal Jake is hanging out with these guys. So it was more our reaction to their reaction to us, if you see what I mean. We didn't think we'd changed, or I didn't think, because I may as well just stick with I since I wrote the damn thing. I didn't think we'd changed, and I didn't think I'd changed, and I wasn't comfortable with my friends thinking I'd changed. I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not saying they treated us any differently, but there was a definite, shift in their attitude towards us, and that was basically all the song was addressing itself to. Was, look, I just got a different job now. That's all.
And I think that perspective is one that existed in music really through the end of the 20th century. Fast forward to the present day, everyone wants to be famous. Everyone wants to be seen around famous people and let the world, with their phones out, they're ready to show the world how popular they are. It's a very different mindset from the world of nobody's hero.
Yeah, but I think, the fact that anybody can do it now with their phone, as you said, or, they can record in their own living room and put it straight on the internet and stuff. I think there's an equality about that now. Not necessarily always a good thing, because I mentioned earlier there were some terrible bands around, even when record labels were sifting supposedly the wheat from the chaff. Nowadays there aren't any sifting, and I think that if anything, it's even harder now for a young musician or a young actor or a young whatever to make any sort of headway, even though it's much easier to publicize yourself, simply because everybody's doing it now. So there's suddenly you're up against thousands all of a sudden, as opposed to hundreds, and there's no way of telling who's good and who's bad unless you listen to all of them, and nobody's got the time to do that. So yes, I mean, I think that, I think there's more of a desperation to it now than there was even when we were doing it,
For sure. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I want you to answer yes to, but you do whatever feels right. Is it still fun for you to play Suspect Device?
Yeah, it is. And I'll tell you for why. It's because it's some nights it's like lighting the blue touch paper on a firework. If the audience, if the show's going well and you can see it on the set list, you think, okay, now the roof's going to come off. And it's also, if the show's not going well, it's the lifesaver. So it's like, and when you play it, if it's still not going well, then we're screwed. So that's basically the way I tend to look at it. Having said that, though, the last couple of tours we've actually been starting the set with it. So it's that's putting a marker down. Really, is what that is.
Back when you broke up, after that prolific period we talked about, was it just the MTV generation pushing you out of the way, or did you what caused that?
Well, MTV didn't come around for another 4 or 5 years. Actually, MTV came about, I think, just when we had just reformed.
MTV was early 80s, and you guys...
Oh, maybe it had then. Yeah, actually, now you mention it, I think it had, because I seem to recall Henry, our guitar player at the time, had been on vacation over here in San Francisco, I think, and yeah, he saw it before any of the rest of us did. And he came back and said, we've got a couple of ropey old videos lying about, we should try and get it out to them. And nobody nobody paid any attention to him. We're like, yeah, that's not going to last. yeah, yeah, we're the people you want to trust with your betting money. Yep, nah, don't bet on that. But yeah, I mean, that wasn't really uppermost in our minds because it wasn't really a UK thing. What was uppermost in our minds was we were all pulling in four different directions, really. Well, more three. I think myself and Dolphin were kind of on the same page, roughly. Ali and Henry were on two different pages altogether. And also, yes, I mean, it was the next wave of bands coming through. Definitely. So that, I mean, the tide had changed. Nobody was really interested in bands with guitars anymore. So at least not with primarily guitars. Yeah, and I know that's been a saying since the Beatles came around. Guitar bands are finished or whatever. But people were, punk rock was pretty much seen as dead, gone, buried, had its day, and the new romantic thing was happening. The Spandau Ballet, Duran Duran, those guys. And again, I saw all of those bands, and I thought some of them were really good. Again, it's like I said earlier, there was good and bad in all genres of music. If they had the songs, that was all that really mattered. And some of those guys really did have some great songs. And so yeah, between that, there was a dwindling of the audience. We were pulling in different directions. We were arguing a lot amongst ourselves. I mean, like I said, we formed the band when I think I was 18 or 19 years old, and it started just as a hobby. It was just something we did for fun. I mentioned earlier that the bands we wanted to see didn't come and play. So a part of our thinking in forming the band really was, if we want to hear this music live, we're going to have to do it ourselves.
Right.
So for something that just started out being fun to suddenly become your job, and not just our job, but we had other people relying on us. We had a sound engineer on a permanent retainer, we had a manager, we had a tour manager, and so there was an infrastructure around the band that it was kind of just getting me down. Really, this was supposed to be fun, and now it's work. I was what, 23, something like that. And really looking back on it, and I've said this a couple of times, really looking back on it, what we should have done is we should have probably taken a year off, just gone away, done something totally separate. I don't know, go watch football for a year, record a solo album if you want to, but just don't see anybody in Stiff Little Fingers for a year. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I'm not laying blame at anybody's feet, because I think somebody should have thought of it. And there you would think maybe management should have thought of it. But again, our manager had never been a manager either, so he was there because he was a friend who I wrote songs with. That was, that was what he wanted to be. He was a songwriter. He was like the world's least, he was the world's most reluctant rock and roll manager. I've often said that. He really didn't want to do that. I mean, I'm sure he got a kick out of it sometimes. I think telling Richard Branson to go fuck himself at one point was probably a lot of fun for him. But beyond that, I don't think he really enjoyed it that much. He loved the creative side of things. He loved writing songs. He loved getting involved with the album covers and all that sort of thing. So it was. I think it was naivety on our part. I think we should have just taken a year off and then come back to it, hopefully refreshed. And also, again, in a year, the whole face of the music business could have changed. Nobody,
right.
You can't predict the future.
So again, Metro, May 10th, Stiff Little Fingers. Yeah. As you're heading into this final coast to coast U.S. tour, is there any melancholy? Is there any reflection? Are you taking inventory of how you got here? Are you sad? Are you happy?
I think there probably will be when it's done. The realization, like I said, if we get invited to come play Riot Fest, then I'll be back in Chicago again. If we get invited to come play, and that's basically what we're looking at going forward with regards to this country, just because it's so damn huge, you can't just, pop out and do 4 or 5 shows and call it a tour. You can't do that. But obviously, if you get invited to do a couple of festivals, then we will. You'll throw a few shows around that as well, just because 2 of the guys, as I said, live in England anyway, so just to get them over. But yes, I think there's an element of, it's like any of these things, I mean, I've already started thinking in terms of, will I ever get to go see Paris again? Will I ever get to go see, Italy again? Will I ever get, because, it's too easy the older you get to just hide away as a little hermit in your front room. But that's kind of what I wanted to do, was to go hide away, like I said, sit on the porch and watch the deer go by. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to going to a lot of towns that I know I definitely won't see again. Just because I've got a lot of fond memories of a lot of the tour in here. I'm looking forward to seeing friends I've got who live in those towns now, who I haven't seen since we last toured America. Obviously, Chicago's kind of a different. It's a different case because I only left there a year ago, and I still talk to the majority of those friends. So it's going to be a case that's going to be more like sort of oh yeah, I just saw this guy last week. But yeah, I mean, there probably will be. I mean, I'm trying not to. I think there's a lot of wisdom in what Shirley said when I suggested stopping altogether. And she just said I would miss it too much. I think she's right. I mean, but I'll miss the people more than anything, I think, rather than the action. I certainly won't miss the damn traveling, that's for sure. But actually, funnily enough, I was literally just in my new local bar on Friday night, and we're only getting to know the people out here, and they're all very sweet, and they're really nice people. And, so they've gotten used to me now already. I think since I've been here, I've gone off on tour like 3-4 times. And just, in the way of making conversation, one of the guys said, so when is it you're off on tour again? I said, I'll leave on the 29th. And they went, right, so you're doing this on a tour bus, right? I said, yeah. And somebody else leaned down the bar and went, oh, you're doing a bus tour. Have you ever done one of those before? Yeah, once or twice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jake, we're excited to see you again. I realize because of the Chicago thing, yeah, we just saw that guy, but we're excited to just see that guy again.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I really am.